Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Untitled Astrology. It's Sunday, November 25th today, and I'm doing a live session to talk about the Sun-Jupiter conjunction, which Mercury retrograde is getting in on right now. We're also going to talk about the I Ching and its relationship to astrology, how I use the two together, and then an I Ching reading that goes along with today's forecast to give you a sense of how I use the two together, which I think will be really interesting for a lot of people because the I Ching is not as well known, but equally, if not in some ways, even more sophisticated and crazy of a system of divination. So I'm excited to teach you a little bit about the I Ching today and show you how the I Ching can be used next to astrology, which I think is really cool. So we'll look at an I Ching reading for today's Mercury, Jupiter, Sun sort of get together in Sagittarius. And then finally, I have some really good questions from some readers and viewers, and I'll just give you a little preview of what those are. Someone has a question about stelliums, how to treat stelliums of planets, meaning when a whole bunch of planets are close together in the same sign. How do you look at those kinds of things? What do you think of them? And then another really interesting question, which has to do with how to deal with planetary transits when you can feel them in your body. Some people are very sensitive and say they can really feel the planetary transit in their body, and what are we supposed to do with that, especially if we're trying to say something about not getting overly identified with our birth chart or with planetary events or whatever. How do you deal with really feeling a Neptune transit or something like that, which is another great question. And then I had one more question, which was, what are composite charts, and do you think they work? So those are the questions that we'll be looking at today after we get through a couple of other things here. Jupiter conjunction and all of the other things on the list for today, I want to just make a general announcement that my next one-year online certification course begins this Saturday. We meet on Saturdays from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern time, so that should work out with a variety of different time zones. We meet for a year. Over the course of the year, there are 30 classes that we have, plus there's 12 guest lectures, which are on different days of the week, and all of that is a part of the one-year program that I offer. The guest teachers are really cool. They come from all over the field of professional astrology, talking on a lot of different subjects. And then the 30 classes that I teach are a sort of step-by-step, very structured guided tour of ancient Hellenistic astrology and the meaningful bridges that we can make between ancient astrological concepts, theories, philosophies, techniques, and modern day client-centered, astrological counseling. So this course is, I'm really passionate about it. This is my 17th time I've led this course over the period of a full year. I do 2 of them per year. It's a great community setting. There's lots of learning and sharing and growing together. A lot of people come to it and they say, I've already had some training in astrology, so why would I want to go back to the basics? But this is not a basic course. You could be a total beginner and start in this course and be just fine, because you are, in a sense, starting from the roots of ancient astrology and sort of moving up. But for most people who have never had any training in ancient or classical theories and ideas, this class is totally revolutionary for your understanding of astrology. So you go back and you're learning concepts like, why do the house topics, why are they assigned in the way that they are? I just did a talk on Nadia Shah's YouTube channel, and I was talking about some of the reasons that the topics of the houses are assigned in the way they are, which frankly a lot of people don't know about. And then similarly about things like essential dignities, about planetary aspects, different types of planetary aspects. What is an aspect really, and how were they used? And they were used originally in ways that are very different in some senses compared to how we use them today. So all of this builds into, as well as just shedding light on a lot of ancient concepts that people don't know about, we then build into how do we use an ancient approach and a sort of modern psychological approach together with live clients. And we start eventually hosting live clients in the classroom space, and you get to see me read for them. So it's a great program. I have plenty of alumni who'd be glad to talk to you about it if you're interested. I am running a sale on that program, plus my year 2 program, plus my horary apprenticeship, which are 3 different year-long programs that I offer through my Kickstarter right now. So discounted tuition, you save a whole bunch. So if you are interested in that, definitely take advantage of it. You'll be helping me raise money to support my work in the year ahead. Okay, so shameless self-promotion over. Now let's go on to talking about the Sun-Jupiter conjunction. So I've seen a lot of things floating around on social media about Sun-Jupiter, most of which are overwhelmingly positive, right? And there's pretty good reason for that. If you know a little bit about the planetary symbolism, you can see very quickly, like, the sun is knowledge and ambition and action, and in some sense, the sun is related to fame and leadership. So it has these, kind of bright qualities, very shiny for the ego. We like that. Oh, that sounds good. Action, ambition, fame, knowledge, enlightenment, clarity, insight, all solar qualities. That sounds good, right? And it is. There's a lot. There's actually, quite literally, you can learn a lot right now from Sun Jupiter coming together. Has the ability to expand your mind and expand your understanding of something is there. It's there for the taking right now, or it's indicated by the sky. It's something that is happening. Jupiter, on the other hand, is a planet that's related to growth and bigness and grandiosity. It's related to Zeus, and I did a 3-part series on Jupiter entering Sagittarius. You can check out on my YouTube channel. This is another planet that people get really excited about. Basically, it's so. When you put the Sun and Jupiter together at the very same degree, you get that kind of that big, expressive, authoritative, grand, jovial, optimistic, noble. It's kind of kingly or queenly, has a sort of regal, pronounced feeling to it. Big results, big ideas, big actions, big ambitions, big insights, right? That's kind of the mood. So this is fine. There's nothing wrong with this. All of those sort of positive, shiny qualities are, again, there right now. And depending on which whole sign house in your chart they fall into by transit right now, wherever Sagittarius is in your chart, you could look at that and say, these are the topics that might be really kind of big right now. For example, there in Jupiter-Sun conjunction is my 8th house, right? The house of death. Sounds a little heavy, right? But actually, this past week and a half, as a very famous and beloved astrologer is Robert Schmidt, has fallen very ill, looks like maybe passing away. The amount of personal inspiration and kind of insight and growth that I've been going through has been just tremendous, right? So that's a Sun-Jupiter conjunction in the 8th house, right? Death, but it's got this sense of like really growing and learning a lot from a difficult 8th house-like experience. So look at where Sagittarius is in your chart and think there is where, the Sun-Jupiter conjunction is just opening up a portal for growth, faith, hope, learning, redemption, expansion, etc. But on the other hand, and this is what I kind of want to spend time with today, you have to remember that the synodic cycle between the sun and any planet is also depicting the planet's life cycle. So whenever the 2 planets conjoin, the sun and any planet, that is the start of its cycle usually, depending on if it's the retrograde portion or the direct movement in some cases. But when the 2 planets get together, it's an outer planet or a slower moving superior planet like Jupiter. When the sun conjoins Jupiter, because the sun moves faster, so it's the one that does the conjoining. When the sun conjoins Jupiter, it's the start of a new synodic cycle with Jupiter. But this also means that Jupiter is getting swallowed up by the sun. Like, you can't see Jupiter right now at all because it's so close to the sun. It takes an average of about 15 degrees of separation of any planet from the sun, zodiacally speaking, to be able to be seen in the sky. So when the planet starts losing its own light, in whether it's within anywhere within about that 15-degree range, or it starts recovering its own light by separating from the sun and the sun separating from it, you're talking about a death and rebirth process for the planet. So when the sun conjoins Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, because it's faster than those planets, and it gets together with them at the same degree, that planet is being, in a sense, reborn. But it also is depicting like the very late stages of life and even death. So the conjunction, the exact conjunction, this is sort of, sometimes it's talked about as a moment of where the planet is cazimi. It's at the center of the sun. It's sort of empowered by the sun. And that's a sort of rebirth moment. But it's also, or it's sort of, I've heard it described by Austin Coppock as being at the eye of the storm, at the center of the eye of the storm. There's a kind of eerie calm amidst a more turbulent external space where it's going through the combustion. At any rate, either way you look at it, there is a death that takes place when the sun is approaching Jupiter. And then there's a rebirth. So this is also, there's a really strong theme of death and rebirth that's sort of in the air right now around Jupiter and the sun. Now, the reason that this is really important is because, excuse me, this isn't just a normal moment of like, sort of a powered up Jupiter-Sun combination of adjectives. The conjunction is unique because it also spells out the process of something Jupiterian dying and then being reborn. And what does Jupiter usually represent? It represents things like favor. It represents things like benefits or good fortune or good luck. It represents, knowledge and broad understanding. It represents things like faith and hope and growth. And so what that can mean right now is that there are deep insights that are coming. There's a lot of wisdom that's sort of available, but it's coming through the collapse of something. It's coming through, sometimes our ideas or our ideals or our beliefs or our assumptions have to fall apart a little bit for a new insight or a new epiphany to come about. So the potential for some level of disappointment or for there to be some level of disintegration, a challenge to our faith, that's normal right now as well. And some people wonder about that. They kind of go like, well, that was like Sun Jupiter. I was expecting for that conjunction to be like so awesome. And it certainly can. I mean, when Jupiter's, right now, it's just about cazimi. Like the two planets are, the Jupiter's just about sort of at the heart of the sun within that exact sort of 30-minute range of being an exact conjunction. And so Jupiter stuff can get really sort of powered up, and there's a moment of rebirth that's there right now. Don't get me wrong. But we can't forget that things have to fall apart a little bit at the end of a synodic cycle as well. Now, with Jupiter, that can also be Jupiter and the sun, so much grandiosity, so much bigness, that can also indicate the pride that comes before a fall. So where we're puffed up with something or where we think ourselves to be the expert, sometimes we have to get knocked down a peg or two. Or sometimes we question our teachers, or we question teachings that we've held dear. It's a time where we may also see literally figures who are, important teachers or important leaders of one kind or another, faltering, falling down, dying, sort of their health deteriorating. And again, all I can say is that, one of the leading lights of the Renaissance or revival of ancient astrology in the modern time, Robert Schmidt, a great astrologer, is in the process of likely passing over right now. This is actually a perfect sort of depiction of the planetary moment. There's a lot of wisdom and a lot of inspiration that comes when great teachers pass away. But there's also loss, there's also mourning. So the spark also gets passed on to new people. So you also think about the transference of a spark from one to another, but you also think of the resistance that is sometimes there to dying and allowing the younger generation to take up the next leg of the journey. So the resistant, dying old Jupiter right now, a little bit of a tyrant, unwilling to give up power, perhaps, or on the other hand, it's a symbol of corruption or of degradation or the degeneration of something that was whole and big and exciting, and it's sort of falling apart. So these are some of the things that you can look for in your life right now. And again, when we look at the whole sign house that Sagittarius is in, that's often where you can get the most accurate insights about where this energy is sort of applying itself in your life, or where these events are sort of appearing. It's also complicated by the fact that Mercury retrograde is in the mix, right? So Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius is also right there in the mix of things. And sometimes Mercury retrograde is, questioning things, breaking things down, sort of like a time of discombobulation, or having to shift things around in terms of the way you organize something, or the strategy or approach you take, communication dynamics in relationships. So I like to say once in a while it's time for like a philosophical reset, where you just press reset on your life and how your outlook. It's a time where, sometimes it's just like the way we've been thinking about things needs to just needs to take a press pause and start doing it all over again. Start rebuilding a new way of believing, a new way of teaching or thinking or writing, or a new way of communicating, because something isn't working or some approach has gotten us into trouble in some way. All right, so those are some of the. I always like to go for what's in the shadow, what's being overlooked, because again, it's a pretty shiny transit in a lot of ways. Like, ooh, Jupiter's at the heart of the sun. It's like this big kind of exciting moment. Yeah, recharging. Zeus is like recharging his thunderbolts, ready for blast off or whatever. And there is that feeling of regeneration and rebirth. It could renewal of faith, restoral, redemption, return of hope. A new outlook that kind of sets things in motion. That's all there. But it's also important not to just lose track of the breakdown that's also happening right now around Jupiter, around things that we believe, that we preach, that we think, that we, or that we don't take seriously enough. Sometimes we just go through life being like, yeah, I'm a spiritual person. Like, I consider myself a spiritual person. But all that really means is that, like, yeah, I admit there's something going on, but, I'm not really doing anything about it. And, sometimes this is a moment, like this can be a great moment where we're called to action. We say, there's no way that you aren't acting in the world based upon beliefs that you have. So to say I'm spiritual and that's good enough, usually what that means is I have a lot of unexplored or unexamined beliefs, and we're acting again on our beliefs all the time in the world, every day, all the time, out there in the world. We're just acting a lot of the times on unconscious, unexplored, or unexamined beliefs that we have. It's a great time to become more conscious of them and the effects that they've had in your life. And then to to take a step forward to say, I need to take a class. I need to think about establishing a spiritual practice. I need to think about taking it a little bit more seriously, because clearly the assumptions that I have about reality, about myself and about others, if they go unexamined, they can lead to painful results. So a good time to also just sort of have that gut check of like, there's some spirituality. Spiritual life requires some work. And that work can be joyful and uplifting and fun. There's no reason that it has to be like, you can't whistle while you work. And Jupiter certainly gives some lift in the step. So that's a nice thing to be restored, to have faith and action come together right now. All right, so just a little bit about Jupiter and the Sun. Mercury retrogrades in on the mix, so really throwing some curveballs in there, really challenging us to rethink things. Of course, Mercury's moving into a square with Mars right now in the next 24 hours as well, so be careful of that kind of boiling water image. You got Mars in a water sign square to Mercury in a fire sign. That's a boiling pot of water, right? So you got to be careful of like intense emotional reactions. Kind of the kind of passive aggressive email or the thing that triggers you, and maybe some tendency toward mental or intellectual or communicative conflict with others right now, as well as challenges around technology. Don't be too cavalier trying to fix, solve, reorganize, or address some big technological problem today. You might be able to analyze the problem, but anything where you're trying to quickly fix something, be careful of that, because it may take a little bit more doing and a little bit more patience. It's a good moment to strategize, but this moment can lead to frustration if you're not sort of careful. All right. Excuse me. So, okay, so that's the next thing. My next thing on my list is actually to talk about the I Ching and astrology. So, excuse me, I need to get a drink of water, which I'll do when I'm finished. All right, so the I Ching and astrology. This is something I'm really passionate about. If you have read my work, then you probably know that pretty regularly I employ the I Ching to help me read things, to help me get a read on what's happening in the sky on any given day. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what the I Ching is and what it has in common with astrology, and how I use it, and then give you an example of how I use it with today's Sun-Jupiter conjunction. So first of all, a lot of people don't even know what the I Ching is. The I Ching is actually, you know what? I am going to get a drink of water. I'll be right back. Much better. Okay, so not a lot of people know what the I Ching is. The I Ching is the oldest of the Chinese classics. So it's a really, really ancient Chinese philosophical, sort of metaphysical scripture. It's like a treatise on the nature of reality. And the basic idea of the I Ching is based on what sometimes we will call the Tao, or the way that cannot be named. So the I Ching is sort of a map of the different processes or stages of change that are both repetitive, cyclical, recurring, predictable, and always at play in the world and in the creation and destruction of the universe. So the I Ching is like a scriptural book that, again, sort of the oldest Chinese scripture, and it maps out the stages of change, transformation, and fluctuation of material elements in the cycles of the universe. And these changes are mapped out in terms of very intricate combinations of yin and yang. Yin and yang being the two, the active and the passive principles that are always fluctuating and moving in and out of each other in all of these different processes of change. This is the best way I know how to explain it simply. So about the last 500 years BCE, around the same time that horoscopic astrology is coming about, you also see the I Ching being used for the first time as a diviner's, basically like a diviner's almanac or a diviner's manual. If it's kind of similar, I'm going to make a really crude analogy, but if you've ever taken the Bible or a book of some kind and flipped it open to a random page and then taken the teaching from that page, it's a little bit like what happens with the I Ching. It's much more complicated than that, but it's a simple comparison. The I Ching, there's 64 different stages in the I Ching of change that are being mapped out in creation and destruction of the universe. So, and the cyclical, this is cyclical, this is ongoing cyclical dynamic. And again, these 64 different stages are all mapped out according to different, very particular interactions of yin and yang. So every stage is called basically, each stage is correlated to what's called a hexagram. A hexagram is it's like a 6-lined figure, and there's either broken or solid lines, 6 of them in total, comprising the image. And those 6 lines will be broken or solid, meaning that they are either yang or they are yin. A solid line is yang and a broken line is yin. So the different combinations might be like 3 solid lines and 3 broken lines, or 2 broken lines and 4 solid lines, or something like that. The total possible number of combinations of yin and yang that can be present in one of these 6-lined figures is 64. Hence, you have 64 hexagrams that go from, and there's a sequence of them, sometimes a famous sequence called the King Wen sequence. And this sequence maps out the different interactions of yin and yang in these 6-lined figures that, again, correspond to the different changes happening in the material world. So you would approach the I Ching, right, with a question, just like you would any other diviner, a tarot reader or an astrologer or whatever. You typically would approach with a question, and the question might be something like, what are my finances going to be like in the year ahead? I'm just making up a very simple, silly question, but at which point, what happens is the diviner would work with what are called yarrow stalks. I'll show you these. I actually have them. So these are yarrow stalks right here. They're like little dried sticks of yarrow, and there's a way of manipulating these stalks through it's a kind of an interesting little game that you play with these stalks that translates numerically the way that you draw them out and separate them into piles, and eventually leads to a number, and that number will correlate with either a broken line or a solid line. So you might play with these sticks and kind of end up with a numerical result of 7, 8, or 9, and that could be like a broken stalk or a broken line or a solid line, something like that. Sometimes people use coins too. They'll just flip 3 coins. Actually, I think I have these coins too, which you can find these online. A lot of the times people use these little coins. You'll see it looks just like that. All right, so you'll use these coins, flip 3 of them, and basically they'll correlate with, there'll be like a heads, tails, there'll be like a yin and a yang, and you'll similarly sort of calculate their value, and gradually you draw up 6 lines, all of which are either, here's a yin, here's a yang, there's a yang, here's another yang, there's a yin, and you get this figure. The figure is one of 64 figures in this ancient scriptural almanac. So you turn, let's say you ask the question, what will my finances be like in the year ahead? You go through this sort of numerical manipulation, and then you land on, say, hexagram number 36, or hexagram number 54, or hexagram number 17, or whatever the case might be. Then you will go in the I Ching to that particular hexagram, and you will study it. It has a judgment or a decision that tells you the nature of what that stage of the unfolding of the Tao is all about, how that particular stage of the interaction of yin and yang is at work in the situation at hand that you're asking about. And then sometimes one of the lines of the hexagram or several of the lines of the hexagram will be a changing line, which means it's sort of in the process of turning from yin to yang, in which case one hexagram will also be leading to a second hexagram because certain lines will transform to form a new hexagram. The particular lines that are changing, each line of the hexagram also has an individual teaching associated with it. So the hexagram as a whole has teachings associated with it, Confucian commentary. It's rich. And then the changing lines will have very specific teachings, and then the second hexagram will have a teaching. So when you get all of that together, you have basically like a very elaborate, amazing ancient fortune cookie sitting in front of you, specifically addressing what you're asking about. And you have to study the scriptures you have to get to know the I Ching over a long period of time. It's not something for an impatient person to take up, because you really have to get to know the I Ching and then study these sort of texts over a long period of time to get to sort of understand what is being said when you ask a question. So that's how the I Ching works. What does it have in common with astrology? Well, very simply, the I Ching is not as much about, in some ways, it's used as a diviner's tool, just like anything else. What's my money going to be like? It'll give you an answer. It can, by the sequence of hexagrams that come up and the teachings associated with them, it can actually give you some predictive sense of what's going to happen. I've used the I Ching predictively for years and with great accuracy, like unbelievable accuracy. However, even more important than just getting an answer from the I Ching is always studying the Tao. How is the higher intelligence, how is the higher divine intelligence, you might say, or order of the cosmos present in the way that these changes are unfolding? So on one level, you very literally see the changing phenomenon that you're inquiring about. You get a sort of predictive answer. But in a much deeper sense, you're studying the Tao so that regardless of what the answer is, you understand the divine intelligence that's a part of whatever stages of change are occurring in the world. This is exactly what astrology is about as well. Astrology is something that very accurately through the planetary cycles and the kind of elaborate calculations of aspects and all of this stuff is depicting for us the changes happening in the material world around us all the time. How will my job go this year? Okay, well, let's talk about the different sort of wave patterns of change that are going to happen in that area of life, right? Let's follow the bouncing ball along that track and watch how the planets speak out what's going to happen. And in that sense, the astrology, like the Tao, is telling us that there's really nothing new under heaven. Like everything that's happening here is unfolding according to beautiful, intricate divine laws and divine order and meaningfulness. And we can study that. And we get really anxious about all of these results because we're really wrapped up in them. And so there can be some help in terms of alleviating our anxiety. Like I have a question and the I Ching or astrology can give me an answer. But the other thing is that, like the I Ching teaching us about the Tao, like, okay, your job is going to go like this, or your money's going to go like that. Well, so what? Who cares? You know what I mean? Like someday I'm going to die. Someday the whole solar system is going to be gone. Like, like in the big scope of things, how could I understand the changes that are going to come in my job or my money or whatever as reflective of eternity, right? So when you read the I Ching, it's like there's always a double layeredness to it. And the same thing with astrology. When you study the moving planets and transits of astrology, you're getting a sense for how creation is unfolding. But if you study the movements of the planets very deeply and carefully over time, you'll also see the message behind it. You'll see the call to return to your eternal identity as a spirit soul and into a relationship with your divine source. And, or, again, as they say in the Tao Te Ching, when you observe the changes of the material world, you slowly start to see that invisible way that can't be named, that invisible divine force that's moving through everything. You draw closer to it. You come into communion with it. But you have to be patient enough to study the fluctuations and changes of the material world and recognize that ultimately you are not any of it. That distance is granted to us when we study astrology, not just for the changes that are happening, but we also study it to understand the Tao. And it's the same principle in the I Ching. So that being said, how does the I Ching apply to today's astrology? And this is where I think it's really, really interesting. So here's how I use it, and you can use it too. What I'll do is I will cast the I Ching alongside of a reading that I'm doing, and I will basically ask for additional insight into both the types of things that are likely to happen from a predictive standpoint, but also in terms of the Tao of the planetary configurations that I'm writing about on a given day. So like this morning when I sat down to write about Jupiter and the Sun coming together and Mercury and Sagittarius being retrograde very closely with the three of them, I thought about it for a long time. And then I cast the I Ching, and I asked the I Ching very specifically, what does this transit indicate in general terms? And what is the deeper teaching or Tao of this movement, of this planetary archetypal sort of configuration? So I will do that oftentimes with the astrology of the day. And people, again, who have read my work for a while know that that's something that you can read, you can check out very consistently in my work. I include the I Ching somewhat regularly, sometimes more than others. So this morning, when I cast the I Ching asking about this Jupiter-Sun conjunction, I was relieved to hear, just from the I Ching, that my suspicion that there is a death at hand, that there's a loss, a decay, as well as a rebirth, that there's some discombobulation in the air, there's some sense of getting ahead of ourselves, or maybe even the pride that comes before a fall is present, as well as restoration, return of hope, starting over. The I Ching really confirmed that when I did the reading. So here's what it came back with. First hexagram that came up from the 64 different sort of stages of the Tao it's the 52nd hexagram, and it is called, sometimes translated as the mountain. And the mountain is a picture basically of keeping still, of meditation, of silence, of stillness, of passivity. And usually when you get the mountain, it's a way of saying, if you're worried about something, to keep still, don't act, just hang out. Just chill. But if it's changing, if the hexagram is changing, then usually it's about something that is happening that's moving from stillness towards something. Okay, so the second line was changing this morning, and the second line reads, keeping his calves still, he cannot rescue the one he follows, his heart is not glad. In the mountain, one of the interesting things is that all of the lines really depict all the singular line teachings of the 6-lined hexagram. These are all combinations of yin and yang. They all depict basically the different parts of a body that's sitting still meditating. Very interesting hexagram. The second hexagram in particular talks about keeping one's calves still, one's lower legs. He cannot rescue the one he follows. His heart is not glad. Now, there's a lot of commentary on this, of course, on this line. And so I just distilled it down. There's a couple of sources online that sort of aggregate lots of different translations together in one place. And I find those really interesting, because then you can look and read how 5 or 6 different scholars of the I Ching have commented on that, and even how Confucius commented on it and stuff like that. But at any rate, in this line, you're thinking of the lower legs as the servant of the body, right? Your legs take you where you want to go. They're always sort of doing the grunt work, taking us around. So they're the servants. And in this, we have an image of the legs keeping still, but potentially, just because the legs have stopped doesn't mean that the top of the body won't fall over. So it's almost like a picture of someone walking along, and if suddenly you were to need to stop really instantly and just stop, and your legs just frozen planted, the rest of your momentum would carry you forward and you would fall. So this verse has the picture of keeping the legs still. He cannot rescue the one he follows. In other words, even though you keep still at the legs, the top part's still going to go over, or the one that you serve is still going to fall. You can't save them. And his heart is not glad, meaning he's sad. He's sad that, sad that he didn't, the servant is sad that he couldn't stop sooner, having been led astray by a corrupt master. The servant is sad that he didn't do his job soon enough, preventing a fall, right? So there's a heavy-heartedness, because even though one catches and sees the need to keep still or to stop something, there's too much momentum, and something else is going to fall. That's the gist of it as I have understood it over the years. So here's what I wrote this morning. I said, the student or servant recognizes that he can no longer follow a master or teacher due to some fault of character, and so he stops following him. But because the master is more powerful, the master's fate cannot be changed by the servant. The servant may stop, but the master cannot be convinced to stop or change his ways. Well, how many times have you in a relationship with somebody, and the two of you in a relationship or a group of people are getting involved in something, and suddenly you realize, well, this isn't good. We shouldn't do this. And you try to put a stop to it, but it's too late. You're outnumbered, or there's too much momentum going in that direction, and something bad can't be avoided. And even though you were the singular voice of dissent, and you tried to help, it couldn't be helped, and it gives you a heavy heart, right? That's the kind of thing that's present right now. People who are intractable, who will not listen because they're puffed up and proud, and they think they know everything. And even if you want to be the voice of like, wait, I'm confused, wait, hold on, let's think about this, there may not be a willingness to listen. Okay, so that's one thing that sort of is being predicted by the I Ching in relation to the Jupiter-Sun transit right now. But you can also think of the servant and the master as different parts of yourself. You can think of the servant as the body and the master as the ego. The servant says, oh my God, I shouldn't be eating this, or I shouldn't be doing that, or I shouldn't be smoking any longer, or whatever the thing is, but the damage has already been done. And so you may have to suffer some level of consequence, even though you've recognized that something needs to change. In other words, there may still be a consequence to come. This is also the kind of death that's happening with Zeus Jupiter right now and the sun, that there's like, now I know what I need to do. I have to stop some other way of being, but that doesn't mean that there won't also be a little bit of a consequence. So it's a moment where there can be great insight and great clarity, but it may come through something breaking down a little bit. That's exactly what I was talking about earlier. So similarly, I said, just imagine that if you're running in forward motion and suddenly you just anchor your legs and stop, you're going to fall over. But that's kind of what this transit is talking about, in a sense. There's a lot of forward momentum and bigness and whatever, but there's also a death. Mercury is also retrograde, backing into the sun in this sign. So it's the pride that comes before the fall, the insight that I need to change, that comes at the same time that a consequence is about to happen. So that's kind of what's there. Now, the second line changes. It leads to hexagram number 18 as the second hexagram, which is called repairing the damage. So in repairing the damage, it's very basic. You're repairing what's been damaged. You're trying to repair something that's been damaged, and sometimes from the base up. Now, by the way, in the past couple of weeks, by the way, just as an aside, there have been a number of very gruesome leg injuries in professional sports or college sports. So just as an aside, that sometimes when the death of Jupiter is occurring slowly, and Jupiter is, of course, associated with the hips and sort of, or excuse me, Sagittarius is sort of associated with the hips and things like that. And you also have Mercury retrograde in a sign that's often related to athletes, Sagittarius and things like that. This is also sometimes very literal. For example, you literally have to be careful of misstepping, of slipping, of falling. Things like that can actually be really literal. On the other hand, repairing the damage. So your hexagram 18 is the second hexagram, and it just says, okay, so you're going to have to repair the damage. Well, the good news about repairing the damage is that it means that repair is possible. So again, this idea of rejuvenation, restoral of faith, renewal, optimism, hope, they're all there right now, but it might be connected to needing to repair something that's been damaged or harmed by one's own actions or by a group or a partner or something like that. So, if you're also in a situation where you're in a group or dealing with a boss or a spouse or something like that who has caused some problems, and now you're having to kind of repair the damage for it. This is also sort of depicted by the astrology right now as a sort of needing to restore, pick faith back up, pick hope back up, try to renew or revive something. But that may involve having to kind of clean up after people's accidents or problems. The other thing that's there is this idea of, again, the ego and the ego and the body and the higher self. So sometimes the ego likes to think that it's in control of everything, that it's the master, but actually it's the servant, because this life, this body, and this ego are all temporary. Literally, me, my clothing, my style, my personality, my psychology, all of it is just as much a costume as my fingers and my bones and legs and flesh and saliva and everything else. These are things that are discarded at the time of birth. They carry on in the subtle body, but there is ultimately no stable sense of egoic psychological identity that keeps going lifetime to lifetime. We have perhaps a spiritual sense of self. We call it the higher self, that maybe is our true master. But it takes some work in this lifetime to make sure that the ego is in service to the soul and not the other way around, where the ego thinks it's the master of everything. So if you're, again, it's a moment where your ego can get checked by things and you have to clean up after your mistakes or whatever. But this is also a blessing in disguise, because repairing the damage says you can start a new chapter right now. You can pick up the broken pieces and put them together. You can remember your eternal identity, in other words, and your ego can remember its place as a servant to something bigger than itself in this lifetime and the immediate concerns, and et cetera, et cetera. Again, why do we do astrology? Why do we study the I Ching? Not just because we want to know what's going to happen. Our ego is invested in what's going to happen. We have to have a 300-year plan or vision for our life. When we talk about intentions and having all of these intentions and so forth, we need to think about a 300 to 500-year intention. Do you know what I mean? We have to think about well beyond this body and the next body and the next body, and think about how do we start awakening our original identity, and how does that identity come through the vessel of our body and the material phenomenon. There is no better way, in a sense, to start to think about that than to study the changes in the material world, but to study them in terms of the higher intelligence that they are reflective of. So that's why, again, in this moment, there's a sense of reprioritization of values and of restoral of faith through learning, but some pride that comes before a fall, or some way that the ego is being checked as that learning takes place. So really good things to think about with hexagrams 52, the second line changing, leading to hexagram 18. So I hope that was interesting for everybody. You have a little lesson in the I Ching. I apologize if my explanation was a little bit broken up by my throat. I need to make sure that when I do my sessions that I have a glass of water. Usually I do, but sometimes I forget. At any rate, the other thing that I want to talk about today are a few really good questions that came in from readers and viewers. So I'm also, by the way, in terms of astrological transits, I'm just getting over a Saturn opposite Mercury transit in my chart, and my throat has just been starting to feel better after basically 6 months of having ongoing sore, raspy throats. My wife is an herbalist, so she started giving me these herbs that I've been taking, and then I've just been conserving my voice a lot more throughout the day. I do a lot of teaching and a lot of reading and a lot of video making and stuff like that. So speaking of the planetary transits in your body, which we're about to talk about, every astrological transit and the way that it's moving through your life and affecting you is always an opportunity for us to learn and grow. So that's actually what we're going to talk about next. The first question that I got from somebody comes from Ashley, and she says, "You often mention that one shouldn't over-identify too much with one's birth chart. The energies are there to be used and give us structure and perception, but they are not us. However, how do you explain transits that trigger points in our birth chart if our birth chart really isn't us? For instance, Neptune is currently stationing direct very near to my natal sun, and I can feel it. I'm feeling a bit edgy, a bit anxious, a weird sense of foreboding. However, I know it's just Neptune's dispersing its foggy magic. Why are we sensitive to energy trigger points in our charts if we are not our charts?" Right, very good. So here's the thing, is that the chart is just like the sky is like a mirror. And it's through the symbolic language of astrology, it is describing the things that we are experiencing here in the material world as eternal spirit souls. So I know that sounds like it's sort of like unmysterious and maybe like uninspiring, but it's actually tremendously inspiring if you think about it a little bit. So, for example, you can have a Neptune transit or a Saturn opposite Mercury transit. It affects your throat or something like that. The simple point that we're trying to make is not that it's not that the planets are causing that to happen. It's that the planets are the sky and the planets, again, like a mirror, like a cosmic clock, are the hands on the clock are moving, the cycles of the planets, etc., are indicating for you what's happening where. Okay, so Mercury opposite or Saturn opposite Mercury, you are having sore throats. You're having a strained Saturn communication Mercury. Okay, so that's something that I dealt with. It was very physical, right? But the point is, it's not that Saturn opposite Mercury is causing that to happen. It's that Saturn opposite Mercury is describing what's happening. So it's like the sky can speak, right? It's like a wise, you got to think of the sky in a birth chart like a very deep, ancient, timeless temple that has the most brilliant oracle sitting inside of it. You can ask it questions or you can look at it and it will give you an indication of what's happening. It'll just describe it in this beautiful language. And we're learning to hear that language because it was called the music of the spheres, right? So it's a language, it's a music, and what it's doing is describing or mirroring for us what's happening. Just like a tarot card isn't causing me to have a raspy throat, but a tarot card is maybe indicating or describing or helping point to what I'm experiencing. So these are like that. They're like indicators. Okay, so a lot of times we get confused because we say the planetary energies like that. I've said this before, but it's worth repeating. It's not that there aren't material energies that are affecting us, right? Like, of course, there's innumerable energies, a lot of them very, very subtle, some of them very gross. Like the wind is very gross, like I can feel it right on my face. But being in a room with someone who has stage 4 cancer, like I've just been in a hospital room with someone who's dying of cancer after a stroke, the energy in that room with someone dying It's not like the wind blowing on my face. There's definitely a difference between how it feels in that ICU hospital room and how it feels once I go outside. As we say, the energy shifts. And everyone knows what that's like. If you go to somebody's house that has really lifted, positive energy, you'll feel it. Okay, a lot of that stuff's really subtle. And the mistake that we make is thinking that it's the planets that are causing all of that. No. Make no mistake. The planets are describing that. The planets are mirroring for us, are talking about that energy. They have the power to do that, as do a lot of other symbolic languages and models. But the planets cannot possibly circumscribe the vast number of material forces, both subtle and gross, that we are experiencing all the time. So the planets are like placeholders, like symbolic placeholders. And what they're doing is they're telling us about what kinds of influences we're experiencing. And they have a way of holding a lot of, and describing a lot of different kinds of experiences for us. And then, again, so Saturn opposite Mercury can describe a wide range of both events, feelings in my body, et cetera, et cetera. It's not causing them, but it's describing them. That doesn't mean that I don't feel energies in my body or whatever, and I can't sort of see those feelings that I have in my body in relation to the archetype of Saturn or something like that. But it's very different than saying literally the planet Saturn is causing my sore throat. Do you see what I'm saying? No, the symbolic language of astrology is helping us understand that Saturn is communicating something about all different kinds of energies and forces and patterns that are working and manifesting in certain specific concrete ways, like repetitive sore throats, or more disciplined writing, or something like Mercury Saturn, right? So hopefully that answers that part of the question. But the next part that's really important is still, how do we take these transits or these experiences? If we are feeling them, how do we not get sort of identified with it? Well, it's very, very simple. Like, you just ask yourself the very, very basic question. Most people who practice astrology do not believe that ultimately you are the body, which means that they believe that your life goes on after you die. Transmigration of the soul, some people call it. And the basic idea being that when you die, that who you are as a spirit soul continues. Right? So in that sense, you have had many bodies before, and you may have many bodies yet to come, or you may change forms continually. All that we're saying when we say don't get identified with your birth chart is not that you're not supposed to have material experiences, or that material experiences aren't, in a sense, real. But what we are saying is that they are not what define you. I mean, just think about it like this. Look, really, you can't die ever. That's who you really are. And you were never born ever. That's who you really are. So just imagine that for a second. And then just think about innumerable experiences that you've had. And if you can't die, and you've never been born, and also as a spirit soul, nothing can harm you. If that's your true nature, right? Eternality, timelessness, if that's who you really are, then all we're saying is that when you have a sore throat, or when you're dying of cancer, or when you're having a Neptune transit, it's making you feel all, weird and Neptunian or foggy, or whatever the adjectives are. The point is that we cultivate a spiritual life so that we have a spiritual center, so that we're in our spiritual identity, that is that eternal being. Because then we can move through these experiences from the standpoint of our eternality, and that changes our relationship to them. While I might still have a sore throat, I don't have to experience it as determinate of my happiness, my freedom, my sense of, I don't have to get freaked out about it. Like, oh my God, am I going to die? Or do you know what I'm saying? So the point is that you can feel, the transits can definitely describe lots of things that you feel in your body. There's a whole sphere of medical astrology, in fact, that can talk about very literal things that you experience in your body. That does not mean that you are your body. Do you know what I mean? Your body is like a tabernacle or a temple that you are currently housed, your spirit soul is currently sort of housed in. And just like the planets are moving through different houses in the sky, they're always changing houses and temples that they're moving through in the sky. And the planets are also literally, in astrology, we relate them to different organs in the body, like Zeus in the liver, you know what I mean? Or Mercury in the hands, or whatever. So similarly, in the ancient world, especially like in the yogic tradition, the gods or the demigods, is sort of depicted by the planets and their movements. They're sort of responsible for different departments within the body, within an ecosystem, within an organization. Like, who's at the top of a company? It's the head of the company, the CEO, the sun, right? Where's the administrative wing that does all of the, like busy work? Okay, that's Mercury's department. But you see, so like the gods, the planets, the way that the archetypes are organized is also a reminder that like everything in the material world, including the organization of your whole body, is all sort of governed by these cycling predictable archetypal forms. But you are not those forms. This is also why Carl Jung and so many depth psychologists have gone to lengths to tell us that we are supposed to have a relationship as a spirit soul to the gods, to the forces of material nature. But in order to have a relationship with them, there has to be differentiation. You have to see yourself as different. So for example, very, very simply, in your letter, Ashley, you said, for instance, Neptune is currently stationing direct very near to my natal sun, and I can feel it. I'm feeling a bit edgy, anxious, a weird sense of foreboding. But notice the way that you phrased it. I am feeling ... But the point is that the ... is not the same as the I. The I that is feeling those things is unique and has experienced lots of other things. Some days you feel really excited. Some days you feel sad. It rains outside. You feel romantic or moody. Our feelings and experiences that we're having are constantly changing. But there is always some sense of an I, a self, that is having those experiences. And the whole point of talking about astrology from the standpoint of not getting identified with your birth chart is, not to discredit the feelings that you have, but rather to say astrology is helping you identify them specifically so that you don't lose track of the I. Otherwise, you are possessed by the gods. That's why, again, in Indian astrology, the planets are called grahas, which means grabbers. This is why Jung said something like the gods have become our diseases, right? Because when we don't live in a conscious, differentiated relationship with the forces of material nature, with the events of the world, remembering that we are eternal beings, then we become possessed by those things. We become grabbed by them, we become held by them, and then in order to claim back some sense of self, we have to go through these really intense episodes, these stories that we get lost in, and that hopefully have some ability to help us return back home to our sense of self. So hopefully that gives some kind of answer to your question. All right. So the next question that was there is someone asked me a question about stelliums. How would you read stelliums? Like if you have a bunch of planets all in the same sign, how do you read it? In ancient astrology, there's a concept called co-presence, which means that when planets are in the same sign, that their qualities commingle with one another. So when you have like a whole bunch of planets, like in the late 80s, you had like a lineup of planets like Uranus, Saturn, Neptune in Capricorn, and then maybe you got the moon in Capricorn, or maybe the sun in Capricorn in there to boot, so you got a whole bunch, big lineup of planets in there. First of all, the simplest way of making sense of that is to look at what whole sign house they're in and just say the topics of that house are going to be very important for this individual by house. Then go to the second most basic level of interpretation, which is whose house are they in? They're in Saturn's house. Okay, they're in Saturn's house. So all of these planets are going to be sort of mingled with Saturnine qualities because they are in the home of Saturn, and Saturn has the responsibility to provide for them. So they're Saturn's house guest, and Saturn has to provide for them. So think about it. If you have a ton of planets in Capricorn, let's say, in the second house, you're going to be, it's going to be a lot of emphasis, let's say, on making money. Then you have a lot of Saturnine influence, really serious, disciplined, focused, hard work, etc. Well, where's Saturn in the chart? That's what you need to look at next. And Saturn is, say, in the 12th house. Okay, so it's someone who really, really wants to make a lot of money, wants to work hard, takes earning and productivity very seriously, and yet their efforts are always foiled. They're too ambitious and they end up being reckless, or there's loss and grief and an inability to deliver, and some sense of needing to take all of these steps to gain money in the world, but they feel ineffectual, they feel impotent, they struggle, their ideas are they're outsider, they don't fit into the world somehow, because the host for all of those big lineup of planets in the second house is Saturn, and he's in the 12th house. So usually there's a very basic way to read stelliums. Look at the whole sign house they're located in, and then look at who's the planetary host. Where is the planetary host? Is it well dignified? Is it in a good house? Then you get a sense of what that stellium is all about. And basically what you're just saying is that there's going to be a very strong emphasis on these topics and on the planet providing for those topics vis-a-vis its own nature. So again, lots of planets in the second house, Saturn's providing for them. So that's usually the best way to start with a stellium, because people get frustrated trying to combine so many adjectives into some meaningful whole, and that's never really the way to do it. It's much better to stick with house topics and then basic planetary rulership and its condition in the chart by house and sign. So hopefully that helps. The last question was about composite charts. Composite charts, are they real? What are they? Etc. So composite charts, I do not use in my practice. They asked me if I use composite charts. I do not use them in my practice. I have no real animosity toward them. They're a more recent development in the history of astrology. They involve taking two people's charts, taking the midpoints of their planets, and combining them into a singular chart. A lot of people find a lot of value in them, so no hate here. But I prefer, rather than looking at composite charts for couples, to get a very deep understanding of the natal karma of each individual chart. And then usually you just get a sense of what kind of karma is very obviously going to be apparent based on what each individual karma is. For example, if I have a karma that is really emotionally reserved and focused on work and productivity and status, and I have someone else who is having a hard time locating their sense of purpose in life, is filled with emotions, but tends to be more dependent in relationships and maybe needy, and really, again, struggling to find some healthy sense of self and purpose in the world, and those two people want to talk about a relationship, then it's very obvious, okay, you got to be careful that you're not attracted to this person because they really seem to have it all together, and they're a beacon of what you're trying to become, more independent and develop a sense of purpose. And you could cling to them and basically let them try to fulfill that part of you. Or on the other hand, that same person who's so productive and whatever, that maybe doesn't have as strong of an emotional life, is going to find it really appealing to date someone who's really emotional and dotes all over them, but in time will come to resent them because they're too focused on work or productivity or success or whatever. So a lot of the times, if you have a really good grasp on each individual chart, the karma between the two people or the karmic possibilities for interaction becomes very obvious. It's really not that difficult. And I don't find that composite charts add anything that's incredibly, meaningful beyond the scope of that analysis in my own work. So I prefer to look at two charts individually, understand the sort of individual karmas, especially looking at their seventh houses and their relationship dynamics, and then sort of compare. and then talk to the two people too. I really love hanging out with a couple and just hearing them talk about their strengths and weaknesses and comparing planets and seeing where there's synastry. For example, synastry, you just say, oh, you guys get along. Oh, you find a lot of emotional security in the relationship. Oh, he's a Pisces and you're a Cancer, or you're a Scorpio and he's a Cancer, or something like that. And there's just an emotional bondedness, and that's our main thing. Well, you can explain those kinds of things, or we really struggle with this. And, like I really like to be, I'm very thoughtful and slow and careful in how I communicate. And he's like really impatient and tends to be more temperamental. Okay, well, Mercury in Taurus versus Mercury in Aries. You can talk about those kinds of comparisons. Again, I don't think composite charts add anything that's spectacular to that mix, and I think that mix is usually more than enough. So I'm really about economy in my practice. Like I try to cut out tools that feel to me like really redundant or unnecessary, and I try to hone in on the basics. But that's my style, and I know people use composite charts to great effect, so no offense meant to anyone. Okay, that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope that this was interesting. Let me take a look at if there's any questions. Let's see. The horse part of the centaur. Okay. Jupiter must be away from the sun minimum 11 degrees. Then only the Jupiter will give good energy. Otherwise, within 11 degrees, Jupiter loses its power and strength. That's correct. However, there is an important concept called a planet being in its chariot, which is when a planet is in its own sign, like Jupiter is right now in Sagittarius, it's protected more or less from the beams of the sun because the sun is its house guest. So you can also, the Jupiter, if Jupiter's in its own rulership or exaltation and it's with, sun is conjoining it, that can be a mitigating factor. But otherwise, I agree with you. Thanks for sharing that. Jupiter is the planet for generosity of the person, justice, honesty, politeness, ethics, God, faith, for childbirth, stomach, gold. Okay. Yeah, the gold part is what I'm really excited about. I'm hoping to get some gold today. I'm just kidding. Jupiter is also the planet for spiritual leader, teacher, huge amount of money. It takes 12 years to complete one round in solar orbit. Thank you. Thank you. More Jupiter info there. You should warm up like a singer before your videos. Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, send me. That would be cool. I'd love to hear about that. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the feedback. I really like that. Do you look at reception in two charts for relationships? Not really, not so much. Usually I just keep it a little bit simpler than that. I think that's it. Yeah, and then Michael says, revivifying perspective on stelliums, Adam, the ability to see the obvious as the Uranian thunderbolt of genius. Yeah, I mean, I know this for myself, like we make so many things in astrology way too complicated. When usually saying few things, but saying them well, is, in my opinion, goes a lot further with clients. It's something I had to learn myself in readings, and especially with stelliums, like just keep it really simple. Whole sign house topics, planetary ruler, where is that ruler? Like very basic. Okay, well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and hope to see you guys again soon. And remember, right now my Kickstarter is going on. I need and cherish the support of all my readers at this time of year to support my work. If you enjoy the videos that I make and the daily astrological content that I create, please consider donating. You can pick a gift reading or gift someone a holiday reading when you do. I have I Ching readings in there. You can pick one. I'll make one for you for the year ahead, record it for you personally, or year ahead astrology readings or tarot readings, discounted tuition in my courses, stuff like that. So thank you very much, everybody. And I hope you have a beautiful end of your week here, or beginning of your, so Sunday. I'm always like thinking Sunday is the beginning of the next week, but it's also sort of the end of the week. So have a good week ahead. Bye.